So welcome to session 4 then of our travels through women of the Bible. Today we're covering 3 more wonderful characters. And as we were having our initial conversations here, most of us hadn't really ever even considered Pilate's wife. I mean, she's given literally one verse in one gospel, and that's it. And she just kind of comes in and then never appears again. But she has an important role to play. And, you know, the context here is that Jesus is going through what he's going through. He's been placed before Pontius Pilate, the Roman governor, in charge of that territory. And Pilate, in his deliberations, is actually quite impressed with Jesus. But he's not ready to sort of take too much responsibility here. He is not interested in dealing with what he thinks as parochial sort of squabbles. So he kind of pulls back and keeps sending Jesus back and forth. Well, finally, he gets to the place where he's on the judgment seat, okay, where he's basically ready to make a verdict. And at that point, that's when his wife comes in this one verse and says, "Don't have anything to do with that innocent man. I have had a terrible dream. Just leave him alone." Basically, that's it. Okay? But a lot is said in that one verse, and it connects her to something much greater than just her, you know, that particular interaction. So we'll look at what some of that is. But it's very interesting. You know, she's someone that had some sort of a dream, maybe a nightmare, and then acted on it. Okay? And it's quite meaningful to me that the only one who speaks up for Jesus in his entire trial is her. Okay, so we'll hold that. So we're going to cover her, and we're going to continue to do our class like we did last week, where I'll go through my introductory comments, but we'll read one scripture and then talk about it rather than doing all the scriptures and going back and forth backwards. Okay. So that's a little bit of background about Pontius Pilate's wife. We'll get more into her. The next women we'll be talking about are ones that are, I think, well known to many of us, Martha and Mary. And in the culture of that day, to visit someone's house, it would have been expected of a woman or of a host to perform in the way Martha did. And that is get the stuff ready, get the food cooked, take care of things, take care of people. So Martha being busy was an expected thing. She was fulfilling a role. It was a good thing. Jesus never judged her as wrong. And then the only issue, though, is Martha is upset because she wants Mary to help. So she goes into this place of wanting Jesus to shame Mary so that she'll get in the kitchen and help her. And that's when Jesus flips the script. And it's something we probably noticed, but I don't know if everyone has. And that is that when Jesus says, you know, Mary's doing the better part by being in the position of a listener and a learner, Jesus is not just saying, so balance out your life, you know, don't just work all the time, although that's part of it. But really, he's flipping the script here in a world that never either invited or expected women to be learners like that, to be in the position of a disciple. Women weren't allowed to follow rabbis like men did. That's how you learn. That's how you sort of really gained a lot of your wisdom. So Jesus encouraging Mary in that position is not just about balancing out Martha, but it's really about flipping the whole roles and reversing the social expectations of what a woman is capable of. Yeah, so that's part of what that story is talking about too. And then lastly, we come to one of my favorite characters, and it's because it's just rare that you get a narrative around a woman of leadership and power. But this is Deborah. And Deborah she has many roles. She's a judge, she's got military experience, she's a prophet, she's a mother. She's got all these roles. And what's interesting about her is she's presented as someone who just is sort of available to her people. Her focus is on the work. She's no figurehead. She's not out there sort of relying on her charisma and they'll come to me when you. No, she's out there sitting under her tree and people come to her. She's sort of like the doctor with the black bag. She's not the celebrity, okay? She's doing the work. And she's attending to the people, helping them make the best choices, doing right by them, and listening to God. And what she really is focused on is constantly, you'll notice this, constantly sort of putting the onus on God. It's not about her, it's not about anyone else, it's about God. It's about the glory to God, it's about the power being given to God. And what we'll see when we read the story is that there's a tension that develops with one of her confidants. I think he's the military leader, Barack, who comes in and he has all these different attitudes and perspectives and wants and desires. And she works with him on that. But there's a tension there because his focus is much different than hers in terms of how he thinks the right things will get accomplished. That is where her wisdom, that is where her strength comes in. And we'll get into some questions and conversation about that. Okay. Any comments or questions about material we've covered to this point or what I've just mentioned? Had any of you studied these characters before? Had any of you studied Deborah before? No. There's no Deborahs in here, and I don't see anyone online. Oh, okay. So Carol has read about Deborah before. Yeah. This is often the case. We just don't really give a lot. Mary and Martha, I think, is one that we've covered before because in our previous Bible studies, and it's a powerful preaching topic, but not Pilate's wife for sure. Okay, Bonnie.
I'm sorry, I'm still eating breakfast. How unusual, I mean, it seems like it would be very unusual for a woman to be in the position of Deborah. And I'm just curious how that all came about.
Yeah, and the funny thing is the book of Judges doesn't really go into that, but you're absolutely right. It's a highly patriarchal society. This is just not something that happened, and yet she's just there, and she's named, and there's no questions asked. There are also no explanations given. So what it suggests is that women in places of leadership and power was a thing. Okay, it was a thing. And it's just like how when you look underneath the surface of the Gospels, you see women disciples. Women were with the band of men the whole time. They were financing it. They were covering different things. They were helping set up things. They were disciples themselves. There's all these different relationships and roles that women always play, but it's a little bit beneath the surface. This isn't beneath the surface, but it isn't explained, and it stands out because it's not a common. It's not common to have a woman in that position.
Maybe it's because men wrote the script, when things were written down, men wrote them.
Yes, that's probably part of it. Yeah, the ones doing the reporting and scribes are men, the educated people, generally being the men. They were the ones that were in charge of reporting the history, and I think that would lead to some measure of bias for sure. All right, any other comments or questions?
I'm just curious. I'm curious, when did that power thing change, flip? Because, I mean, we've had to fight for voting rights in our own country here. Women were really put down.
Yeah.
And it doesn't seem like it really is that way in the Bible, although their culture was.
Yeah, I think that what we see in sort of the ancient texts and the record that we see is that women did have times and places of great leadership, military, judgeships, queens of great power and significance. That was always there. I feel that it really was sort of around the time of the Roman Empire that really became sort of much more stratified and segregated that way. And that's when a lot of the when worship of God became all about the male Godhead, the Trinity, all these different ways that the female was sort of squeezed out of what was orthodox. And then we sort of had all the witch hunt stuff, and that started way back. But it was roughly, to me, around the time of the prominence of Rome and ancient Greece, and moved into that. And you're right that I believe that women maintained roles of significance and power, but they were just sort of pressed down. They were just not sort of talked about as much, and they never lost it. They never had it just complete, but it was always, the narrative suggested that, from men's perspective, they wished it was that way, the way that history is written. So now we're still facing kind of the ramifications of that. And it seems when we look back, I know we shake our heads and say, what have we created here? Ken.
A lot of the roles of men and women in leadership are affected by circumstances of history. I'm taking a course at Sierra College on the Vikings, and the men would go off on these raids, and the women were in charge all the time that they were gone. And so, in their society, women had very prominent roles. They ran the economy, and even sometimes were involved in military exploits themselves.
Yeah.
And in the United States, what happened to change women's roles was World War I and World War II.
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly.
And when women involved factories, they replaced the men, and the men came back expecting that the women were going to leave. They found
Yeah. No, it's amazing. You're right. So sort of historical context and circumstances dramatically impact these roles that we see. Yeah, thank you. Okay. Why don't we get into then, we'll just read the Matthew verse at this point. So it's simply Matthew 27, verse 19. Would someone in the room like to read? Barbara Tillman has volunteered to read just this verse.
Now, as he was seated in the chair of judgment, his wife sent him a message. Have nothing to do with that upright man. I have been extremely upset today by a dream I had about him.
Okay, simple. But what is revealed about her in that one verse? What do we learn about her based on what that verse says? Jane?
I think she was motivated by fear, that this dream made her afraid, and so she stepped up, which took courage. So I think to me, it's a combination of that, and I don't know if she would have stepped up if it hadn't been for the dream. And yet she'd been hearing about this man, Jesus, and she was probably very aware, but it took a dream.
Right.
Yeah.
So she had a dream, we definitely had a dream, and she was motivated to act based on her dream. Yeah. What else? What else does it say in there? What is revealed about her? Martha?
She's going within to get some answers. And she's maybe intuitive, and maybe she's spiritual in some aspect.
Yeah, so she's listening to the message and the motivation of that dream. Okay, she's prompted by it, and then she's really guided by it. And she does stand up and do something courageous, because to do that is not common. Okay, a woman typically would not have been listened to, and no one would have been asking, So it's very courageous what she does. There's one other word in there that says something, and it's very revealing about her. Jay.
Innocent.
Yes, the word innocent. She says innocent. Okay, that is a word of faith. That is a faith statement. Okay, so that's where we see her boldness. Okay, she really is going and saying, no, he's not just a nice guy. I think you should leave him alone. No, he's innocent. Leave him alone. Really powerful. And it makes us, and I think it's important to recognize how, it's a risk for her to do this. Yes, it's her husband, but this is a society that cares very little about someone like her, what they would have to say. Motivated by a dream, no less. So it's very, very much a courageous statement of faith, what she does.
Well, even to speak up, that was in a public way to speak up to her husband. It wasn't like she was just in private at home and said, hey, honey, I think maybe
Absolutely.
This is
just before the verdict.
Yeah,
Can you imagine, like, you're in the O.J. Simpson trial, and Judge Ito's wife comes in, and I can't believe I remember it just came to me the last second. Judge Ito's wife comes in and says something like that, and it's just like, that would have just been just nuts. But this is part of what Matthew's doing here with this one verse, inserting it right there, making it one of the most impactful and dramatic moments in this story of Jesus, because this is it. Once Pilate says what he's about to say, it sets the wheels of state-sponsored execution in motion. So very, very important to notice how crucial, and what a risk she's taking.
This is one of the first examples of somebody receiving a text on their phone.
Normally, I would repeat things that are shared in the post running on Zoom. I think I just left out one. You can always count on Ken. I'll always remember Neheim Maya.
Okay, those of us at home didn't get that.
Oh, well, Ken, okay, I guess I
I'm gonna say.
He just said it's the first example of someone receiving a text message. So,
I have a question.
oh, yes.
Well, a
Go ahead.
comment. It's interesting that they put in one paragraph about it because nobody listens to her. So it's like, why did they add that in?
It's a really good point.
Yeah.
And it's added in. I think we can get to why it's added in, but Marsha's raising something that's really good. She's given this voice, she's given this verse, and yet does Pilate listen? Nothing changes, but it may be connected to his later, when he washes his hands, and it's sort of like that sort of the way that he is kind of 1 foot in, 1 foot out. He's kind of just doing this dance of not really sure how to respond in a way that is what would be asked of a leader. But he washes his hands of it. And maybe some of the agitation that he's feeling, he wasn't willing to go as boldly as his wife did. Maybe she's kind of like where he could have gone if he had chosen to. Because I think that's the way the text presents him. He's very gray. He doesn't want to crucify Jesus, but he doesn't have his internal fortitude to stand up against either the crowd or probably his overlords, because he was not the ultimate power. He's not Caesar, he's just a governor. So he's beholden to many people above him and many people below him, and he performs as a wishy-washy leader that we maybe come to expect. His wife, however, is not. So yes, her words, her actions don't seem to change much, but I do think they connect to things even in the gospel. Let's do this. How about have any of you found yourself in her position where you have been prompted by a dream or a vision or something that made you feel like this is from God, and then did you act on it? And then what happened when you acted on it? You ever had a dream or a vision or a prompting that you knew or felt was from God? And so then did you act on it? And what happened? Big questions. Ken?
Well, fairly recently, I heard from the pastor that we had a member of the church who was principal down at the adult school, who was interested in helping the victims of the mosquito fire and had some connections. And so I felt like this was a God thing, and so I contacted the conference office and asked them if they would send gift cards that could go through him and then to the principal of Forest High and then meet the needs. And I really felt like God was in the midst of that company.
Amen. And that led to $500 being donated to support people in gift cards that had been displaced by the fires. So you felt something, you felt a prompting, you acted on it, and what you found was that there was abundance created or blessing. You participated in a sort of a greater chain of blessing. You didn't interrupt sort of the cycle of blessing, even in the midst of what was a fearful time. Anyone else? Marcia?
I don't know if this would. Well, a couple of times I've been really prompted to talk to somebody who was homeless.
Okay.
And normally I go to the grocery store to go back, but I got into a conversation and I was able to encourage this one particular one, encourage him to do something. I can't remember exactly. And but it didn't have an outcome. I don't know what the outcome was, I guess, from what I did. So maybe that doesn't count, but.
Well, I think it counts. I think it counts. Any of us who have worked with people who are dealing with housing insecurity or homelessness in particular, I feel that one of the common refrains that you hear from people is that no one sees them and no one talks to them. They feel devalued in their humanity. And the very act of seeing them and talking to someone is a way, it's just dignity. It's a way of just saying, you exist and I care about what is happening to you, even if it's just about what's going on today. So to me, you participated in the cycle of humanizing, of demonstrating simple compassion, of taking time to just not be in the zone of going what your way was for that day and allowing yourself to be impacted and to be seen and to see others. So you participate in the cycle of relationship, of connection in a time when someone who is homeless often gets very little of that. It's not ultimate feeling sometimes, but I do think it's important to recognize those places where we are contributing to blessing. We're blessing someone's life and we're blessing ourselves by doing that because we're teaching ourselves the value of stopping, which is what the next story is probably about. Any other comments about promptings or visions that you acted on and what the outcome was? Jane?
This isn't specific, but it makes me realize that the prompting and that urgency that God does give us to do something, that direction and that clarity, it happens in so many different ways. But we don't know what the outcome is going to be. All he asks of us is whatever he's asking of us is just to do it, just to do it. And we don't know. Look at the outcome here. They went ahead and listened to the crowd and crucified Jesus, but she did in her heart what she knew God was, he was right.
And it was a testimony.
Yeah,
Look
and
at the
here
testimony.
it's lasted the test of time, you know?
Yes.
And so it isn't about the outcome. It's about, listening and doing and just planting a seed and however it grows, and we don't know.
Yes, right. Yeah, when in these moments, we're not really worried about outcome at the time. We can see back a lot of times and see, wow, when I took that risk, what happened there? That's important. That's part of learning. But you're right, as we're doing these things, we don't know what the outcome's going to be. She certainly didn't, but that wasn't her motivation. Her motivation was, I can't sit here and stay silent. I'm motivated to speak because of a dream. Maybe because of fear, but at least agitation, at least truth. She felt, Pilate asked famously, what is truth? She didn't have that question. What happened to her was true. Her word innocent is clear. It's not guilty. He is innocent. Okay, this is a very, very clear statement that she tries to make, or she does make. And it stands there as part of, it's on the scales of justice. Pilate didn't utilize it fully, but it's there. And that matters. And our voices matter. I want you to think not just about yourselves then, think about other people in the Bible who listened to dreams and acted on them. What tended to happen to them? Can you think of other examples? Maybe even from the Gospel of Matthew. People who listened to a dream and then acted on it.
Dan, Cecily's been wanting to say something.
Oh, thank you. Go ahead, Cecily. Sorry.
Thank you. Just a few months prior to the outbreak of the COVID virus, before anyone, before it was publicized, I had a strong feeling that I was supposed to install a vegetable garden. And it would weigh on me every day. I just felt like I needed to do that. And so my husband and I built installed a little bit of some raised flower beds to put vegetables. And it wasn't something that really was on my mind to do for myself or like a fun project. It was really like an inner voice saying, you need to install a vegetable garden. And so I eked out, a little bit of a few vegetables. And then the COVID virus hit and we couldn't go shopping, or, it was kind of a scary thing to go shopping. And I regretted that I didn't heed that inner voice, what I was being asked to do or called to do sooner, because I could have shared more of an abundance of food with my neighbors, because we were all hunkering down at home.
Thank you. Yeah, and that instinct is certainly a beautiful one to share out of that abundance. But yes, to learn how to pay attention, and that's part of the question I want to get into too, is like not just paying attention, but how do you know when the promptings are of God? We've experienced that, but how do you know? And I feel like we can tap into that a little bit by going to the question of looking at some other examples of people who respond to dreams, and how do they know? How is the proof in looking back and seeing what the result was? Sometimes I don't know. I saw Cordy, you had your hand up. Yeah, and then Marilyn.
I was having coffee with a friend, and there was a woman nearby talking really loudly and really aggressively into her phone. And she was, pardon me, she was really in a state, and it was really impacting all of us that were on this patio. And of course, it's so easy to say, how rude, or, couldn't she take that elsewhere? Or I don't like cell phones, or, any number of responses like that. And when I got up to leave, I was walking by her. She was off the phone at that time. And I touched her shoulder and I said, I'm so sorry. You're obviously doing something. You're obviously in a situation that's really uncomfortable and causing you a lot of distress. And I'm sorry that you're having to do that. And she looked at me incredibly wide-eyed and sort of took her breath in and said, thank you, that really helps. And as I walked away, my friend said, I can't believe you did that. You don't know that woman. And what came to me was carrying the message that we hear in church. Reach out, demonstrate what we're being taught, what we're being led to do. And I remember being a little quivery, especially about touching her, but I felt really drawn to do that. And, and I liked it. I liked talking with her and just telling her that someone heard her distress. And I liked telling my friend that I was with where that motivation seemed to have come from.
Thank you for that, Cordy. Yeah, taking the risk for that sake, not knowing the outcome, is powerful. And half the people who just heard you share that were thinking inside themselves, would I have done that? And we all were like, no way! Or a lot of people forget that out, because we're taught these days that, or we see so often what the risks are. Oh, I don't want to get involved because what if they pull a gun on me? We go to those places. I don't know if that's really what we think, but we just think it's not going to end up well. So we often say to ourselves, but in that instance, you took a risk because you were motivated by something that was more heart-centered instead of all these other things. And it just allowed something to happen. And the thing is, a lot of times when we do this, it's practice. It's not like, oh, we have to be experts at it right away and I have to know how to say the right thing. No, just respond in the moment. Just give what is there to give and trust that it will be enough. And trust that if it's weird or it doesn't work out the way you'd hoped, that it'll be okay. It's not, it's better to take the risk and, for the right reasons. And then not look back with, oh, I wish I'd said something. Because you got a blessing there. And you offered someone who names that you really helped her by just that simple act, touch, and that acknowledgement. So thank you. Boyce, I had seen Marilyn first, and then I'll go to you. Marilyn?
Yes, and mine's short. Several times I have been walking, I don't know, in downtown Oakland or someplace like that, and have walked by somebody, a homeless person who just looked so sad. And I smiled and said, hi. And you can't believe the change in them, or I couldn't believe it. They perked up, they smiled back, they said hi back, and then I walked on. And so I try to remember to do that.
And even if, and I say thank you, and I think that's powerful and beautiful, and even if they had responded with a grumble or a brush you off, you still enabled someone to have the choice of how they might respond to a human interaction. And that to me is the value, the risking of interaction, not of outcome. Yes, you responded out of this pure spirit of, oh, I see you. I don't really have a conversation in mind, but I want to acknowledge you. So hello, that's a great start.
Well, and the first time I was real reluctant to do it, and I just was kind of being pushed to do it. And so I did. And then it was easier other times.
That's right. That's how it often works. Yeah, that's what practice is. Boyce.
Hi, Marilyn.
Did I look all that sad?
No, but I got you to smile. I've had several dreams that have come true, and probably the most dramatic one was when I was 6 years old. I came out to breakfast, and I was in my pajamas, and I said, you know what I dreamed last night, Mom? And she said, no, I dreamed I had the measles. And she said, well, let's take a look. And she pulled up my pajamas, and I was covered with measles. I don't know if I willed it or not, but I had measles. But that was just a dream. But several years ago, I woke up, and I don't know if it was a dream or somehow I had thought about my dad, who had problems with his heart, and he would every now and then get just really tired, and he just had to sit down. And they discovered that I think it was his red blood cell count was low, and I think those are the ones that carry the oxygen, so they would have to beef it up. And I hadn't thought about that for years and years. And that day, a bunch of us were bike riding, and Tom Barger had to stop and rest. And he was saying, I just all of a sudden get tired. And I remembered what I woke up with, and I said, have you ever had your red blood cell count taken? And he said, no. He said, well, I have a doctor's appointment in a couple of days. I'll try that. Well, apparently he asked the doctor, or they did a red blood cell count, found it was low, and that began his diagnosis of cancer. And so I look back on that, and I just wonder, well, would have the doctor gone ahead and done that or not, unless he mentioned that. So anyway. That it wasn't a dream, but the thought was there when I woke up.
Yeah, we get these promptings, and then we find often that when we share them, it doesn't necessarily lead to these dramatic changes, but what you're naming in both of those examples, and yours too, Marilyn, and yours, Forty, it's just that there's some measure of blessing, there's some measure of connection and relationship that is built, and that is always a better just overall feeling and experience of life than just the ongoing isolation. And what we found is the stories of Jesus, healing stories, are always about building relationship. That the healing and the wholeness of our humanity is found when that happens. So I do believe that we become healers as we seek out these opportunities. And that it's not about we're curing everybody, but just that we become healers of a lot of different things. And most often it's healing something within us. It's going to be touching something within us as much as the people we interact with. So when we listen to the promptings, when we follow the dreams, they tend to continue these cycles of building a relationship and blessing. It seems to be what it is. Yes, Marsha.
You asked a question, and my answer would be Joseph.
Yes, so the question, one of the questions that we were coming to as well were other examples from the Bible, and particularly even Matthew's gospel, of people who had a dream or a prompting and then followed it. She said Joseph, absolutely. Joseph, when he was told by an angel to take your family and get to Egypt because Herod's a coming. And then there was another dream when he was told when to go back and not to go back to Bethlehem. That's what.
And to marry Mary.
Yes, so exactly. So a lot of these promptings, Joseph was a good example. Can you think of anyone else?
Magi.
The Magi.
Yes.
Yes, that's a really powerful one. These sages from the east that come and had they gone to Herod, they would have told him, he would have gotten out of them one way or another, or tried to, the location of the one that he sought. They interrupted the cycle of death. Okay, or another way, in other words, they continued the opportunity of life, of relationship, of the healing story that became Jesus. That to me, they didn't know what the outcome would be. And at that point in the story, it's not known. But it to me is that there's a very strong similarity between Pilate's wife and the Magi in that instance, the dream that they had and responded to. And it's about, what is done with that information changes the story for sure. But I also think that as we know, the Gospel of Matthew, even though Jesus dies, he lives. You can't kill that. The resurrection happens. Love wins. So the story, kind of suggests that, those that act on their dreams, those that take risks for the sake of love and as prompted by God, it always will turn out for the ways of God to happen. That's how God works. So really, it's just basically saying kind of what James said. Our job isn't to worry about it, but when we are prompted by God, we act. Because that's how it works. But then the question is, how do we know that it's from God? That we're getting our promptings. Jim Jones thought he was getting messages from God. And it's horrible, but there's a lot of examples we could think of. But I think the proof is in the pudding, isn't it? That God's will does not tend to work towards devastation and death and destruction and fear and killing like that. Okay? It's those things that bless, that build up, that recover, that heal, that create wholeness. That's when it's our best cue. But it's not always easy. There's no one formula. Okay, so for me to say that, I get it. We can't always know. And so we will be asked at times to act on things without knowing for sure. But it's practice that helps us to discern. It's a deeper faith. It's awareness. It's surrounding ourselves with others who are also seekers. That's how it can be helped. When we're sort of looking for things and looking for these messages and looking for places of light and love to be known. Any other comments or questions about that? Bonnie.
I don't know if this is along the same line, but in the Old Testament, there were dreams that sort of foretold the future. And I'm thinking about Joseph's dream with the sheaves bowing down to him. And then you're going to have to help me because I probably don't remember, but there's like Jacob's ladder.
Yeah, Jacob's dream. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Daniel, There's so many dreamers in the Old Testament, and when you go look back at all these dreams, they all, by list, they portend of paths through difficult circumstances that allow the ways of God to come to fruition. So by listening to these dreams, by following these dreams, many of the people, like Joseph, put themselves at great risk to do that. He faced significant harm because of his dream interpretation, his willingness to listen. It does take risk, but that willingness is how the ways and the paths of God are opened up. And that's what we're asked to do too. Okay, let's take a look at our friends Martha and Mary. That would be Luke chapter 10, verses 38 to 42. I would love it if one of our online friends would be willing to read that. Luke chapter 10, verses 38 to 42. Bob Childs, thank you.
I'm reading from the HarperCollins Study Bible.
Okay. That's NRSV.
Thank you. Now, as they went on their way, he entered a certain village where a woman named Martha welcomed him to enter her home. She had a sister named Mary, who sat at the Lord's feet and listened to what he was saying. But Martha was distracted by her many tasks. So she came to him and asked, "Lord, do you not care that my sister has left me to do all the work by myself? Tell her then to help me." But the Lord answered her, "Martha, Martha, you are worried and distracted by many things. There is need of only one thing. Mary has chosen the better part, which will not be taken away from her."
Thank you. How many of you look at this story or have in your lives look at this story and you kind of feel a little bit of finger wag? A lot of times, those of us who tend to be more like Martha's feel like this story is a bit of a finger wag. I don't think it's intended to be that, but I get how that's how it can come across. No question, because the way it's been used in our popular understanding, it's just sort of like, don't be so busy all the time, you know? And we understand that, but it's not inspirational. It's more sort of it's a little guilt inducing to go there.
Yep.
And these stories most often are not trying to get to where they're going through guilt and shame. They might use some of those strategies to open our eyes, but ultimately, the point of stories like this is not about that. So if it's not about guilt and shame, what else might it be about? And what is it trying to say? Maybe both are wonderful. I think that's a good starting place. We clearly live in a world where we have to do things. We have to do lots of things. We have to plan things. We have to organize people. We have to come to Bible study or decide to come to Zoom, whatever. We do all these things. And we also know that there is a time when we must simply be. We have to replenish. We have to recharge. We cannot simply just go, and we're not asked to. We're asked and encouraged to sit at the feet of love, of God, of Christ, of wisdom, and just listen. And some of us, for some of us, that's a hard thing because we're not used to stopping, or because we have this thing in our head that I'm not smart, or I'm not good enough to do that. Why would Jesus want me? No, I'm better at this, so I can't, whatever we do. So to say all of that, this is what this story kind of brings up for us. But how do you know? Okay, so say you have both of those awarenesses, that there's important time for doing, there's important time for being. How do you know when it's time for one versus the other? How do you know? How have you known? Okay, maybe not how, oh, well, this is how it should be. No. In your life, how have you found out that, oh, I guess I need to stop doing, or I need to start being, or vice versa? How do you know when one is called for versus the other in your life?
Empathy towards the other person,
When you start feeling empathy,
towards the other person, their needs or
So has that been just sort of, has it happened just naturally? Or have you been maybe doing too much of one thing and then all of a sudden you get pulled out of it because you're like, oh my gosh, I have been ignoring this person, or I haven't seen, whatever it is, because I've gotten too caught up. How has it happened? Yes, the empathy was created, but how did that empathy get revealed to you? How does it tend to work? How do you tend to know, oh, I need to shift from doing to being, or vice versa?
Well, for me, it's usually when I make a really big mistake.
Okay, so you fall down,
Yeah.
you make a mistake.
Yeah.
Okay, and maybe that's how sometimes
When
empathy
I'm
would need to.
terribly unkind.
Okay,
Or,
this is good.
yeah.
Okay, one of the worst things we are at doing, most of us, is making mistakes. We're not good at making mistakes. Oh, I mean, we're very good at making mistakes. We're not good at allowing ourselves to make mistakes. We're not good at forgiving ourselves to make mistakes. And when that happens, we become less forgiving of others who make mistakes. I fall into that trap all the time. All the time. And I'm learning to ask forgiveness of my boys when I get on their case about something that I don't need to be on their case about. That kind of thing. So I often, and it is revealed to me, and that's one powerful example of thing. It's revealed to me when we fall down, when we make a mistake. That's when all of a sudden we have this awakening. We see the empathy that's been inside of us that we've been just sort of ignoring or pushing aside or something, but it becomes more apparent. So that's a powerful time. It's humbling. When we're brought to our knees, we're dropped, stopped. Okay. Any other times that you've found it, that you've noticed it? See, Bob.
Is that where you're talking about guilt and shame? I didn't really get that. You introduced this passage with the subject of guilt and shame. And
well, the whole point of Martha, you're all worried about different things, that people who tend to be Marthas often hear this passage as being Jesus wagging a finger at them when he's really not. Martha was simply trying to get her sister to help her, so she was trying to shame Mary in so that Jesus would say, get in the kitchen and help her. So a lot of us see this and we say, oh my gosh, yeah, I see how Jesus was trying to, was sort of wagging a finger at Martha, but it's not about that. But I really, that was just an introduction to the story, to the way we tend to hear the story. What I'm talking about now is, how do we know when we are called in our lives to act more as a doing person or as someone that's just called to be in this moment? How do we know? How do we figure that out? And someone brought up the example of, here's how I figured it out. I make a mistake, I fall down, and then I wake up and I realize, oh my gosh, I've been too much this, maybe too busy to notice something that I really needed to see. That sort of thing. Jane.
When I have my day-to-day life that's quite quiet, just my husband and I at home, I know when I instinctively know when I need to stop, slow down, have stillness, have meditation. It all flows pretty beautifully. But when we have people in our home, we host family gatherings and have people and food to be prepared and people staying overnight, I shift to this other place of very much the Martha, and I'm just boom, boom. And it's gotten, my adult daughters have become this wonderful parent to me now. They parent me and they say, Mom, relax. It's all going to come together. Have a glass of wine or something, chill out a little bit, Mom. And, it's been so good for me that they are helping me learn how to be a more at ease hostess and enjoy my family, enjoy the little kids, enjoy it better. And so I'm grateful that my daughters know they can tell me when, they can call me on it.
That is so good. And I think as we go through our lives, a lot of us discover maybe a middle path like that. Because I do think a lot of us are raised or function in much of our lives as if these two shall not meet. Martha is just the Martha side and Mary is just the Mary side. And yet, both of those names are derived from the same root, Mary and Martha. And so maybe it's possible for us to be a Marytha, or to have a combined way of doing these things, that we can find a better balance. And that's one of the things that this story invites us to. It's like, hey, maybe it's not an either or. Many of us function like that, and that's where it can be a blessing, even though in the moment, or maybe the first few times they did that, you're just like, oh, quiet down, I gotta get this done, whatever, stop. Oh, I will take that one. But whatever it is, so you have to figure it out. And having those prophets in our lives that come in the form of children often is part of the wake-up call.
Yeah.
I saw Marilyn, yeah.
I just started to chuckle when you started to talk because I have 2 daughters and they play that same role with me. And they will, particularly one of them will often say, Mom, I just hate to see you so upset. You know, I'm just sure that it's possible to kind of calm down and realize it's going to all work out and just not be so upset. And that's the exact reminder that I need. I really appreciate it. And there have been some times when I've told her that because she's worried that maybe she makes it worse rather than better.
Oh, I can see how it can work both ways. I get when people are in the buffer zone, sometimes the worst thing to say is calm down.
Yeah.
I can see patronizing.
Kind of like you're being patted on the top of the head.
Yes.
But that's not the way it is. It's coming much more from a feeling of love for me.
And I think that's important to note in this story, that the comments that Jesus makes toward Martha are also rooted in love. He is never rejecting what she's offering. He is just saying, that's good, that's important, that's what society expects, that's what our culture expects. But I'm telling you that this is also another role that you are asked to play. You are a wise one. You are wisdom embodied. You are capable. You're a learner. So don't forget to sit, because you're not just here to serve men. Okay, this is part of what Jesus is doing. And to do that just flips the script. Yes, it's about balancing our lives and doing and being, but it's also about, yes, because you're capable of this, because you are greater than the busy work that commands most of our lives. That is part of the message that all of us can benefit from. Absorbing that like a sponge. You are greater than this. So it doesn't mean, sometimes it means, so get going and kind of allow yourself to be that. Yes, but sometimes it's just about saying you're greater than this. So just don't judge your whole life based on today. It's okay. This might be a crummy moment. This might be a hard time. This doesn't define you though necessarily. There's more to it than this. Because a lot of times, how many times when things fall apart, we start to get in that space of, forget it, everything's terrible, and it's just, this is the way it always is for me. You know, and things never work out. You go for a little bit, but then it comes, whatever it is, we just get so negative. And I see it all the time because I see it here. You know, I grew up in New England. It's one of the most negative places you can possibly be.
Not as negative as North Dakota.
Yeah, and I think I find the negative, I mentioned this before, I find most negative is, and there's a lot of love and wonderfulness about it, but I find where people tend to never move, where they're living close to where their families always have been, there's just a bitterness and a hardness that comes because I think they have these unrequited, dreams and I never got, they feel held back, even though now that I've lived here for 12 years or so, it's like, gosh, I envy that, because they're all close to their friends and family and the roots. So anyway, you can't, there's no winning. It's just about learning acceptance, and kind of when we see these stories, they teach us to just receive it and not judge our whole existence based on what's happening in this circumstance, but to try to cultivate those places that do stir balance, that create balance. Because it's both important. Both of these characters are very important embodiments of discipleship. Yeah.
One of the things I think we often miss in the story of Jesus is the humor. And in this one, I don't know if it's in the Greek, but in the Message, he picks up the line and he makes fun of the 2 sisters. And they're squabbling, and he says to Martha in the Message, your sister's enjoying the main course. Let her enjoy it.
Yeah, yeah.
And I think that's the way Jesus often related to folks rather than finding a
Exactly.
savior or anything.
Yeah.
He brought lightness to the situation.
Right, exactly. That's, I think that is oftentimes what he's doing. He's never trying to, he's not often didactic. He's not pointing fingers. He's trying to help open the hearts of all listeners that are around him, knowing that some of them are receptive and some of them are arms crossed. So he's just trying to find gentle ways to validate and to sort of poke a little bit to help them open their eyes, but it's always about waking up too. It's not just about him waking them up. They have to wake up to it as well. So they fall down in their own ways. They recognize their own limitations and they just discern the compassion and the empathy that has been needed in their lives and in the room. Any other comments or questions about Mary and Martha? Martha.
Well, I've been trying to downsize my life to have more of those moments. Just to, sit here, sit there. And so I was glad the cemetery tour was over. But my neighbor came yesterday afternoon and he said, I have sepsis. And the doctor's gonna take my toe off on Wednesday. Will you take me to the hospital? Well, yeah. And then I can't walk for a week. Okay, and he has turkeys and pheasants he raises, and he's a hoarder, a self-professed hoarder, so everything is filled, it's just so I got on the phone to ask some of the neighbors to maybe get some meals going, but I feel like I have this, just when I want to, it's like, okay, we're going to the full gear. I'm going to be responsible for him for 7 days and orchestrate this and make sure he's, but it's, so it's like, please wait. I don't want to be Martha.
Yeah. So don't.
Then
Don't be Martha.
how do I be
What if you
married?
did that?
Huh?
What if you weren't Martha?
Well, he has to have somebody, he lives alone.
Uh-huh.
Like,
Play with this more. I feel that it doesn't need to be an either or. If that's true, then maybe there's a path through this, and this is like a possible, like an opportunity to say, all right, how can I be present for him without taking full ownership of this? He didn't ask me to do that. And that might be something that I take on. Check that, look at that, and just see. There may be others who are willing and interested to kind of step in and be Martha with you, because you're marched up. That's a little candy. Yes. But it's just, check that a little bit and use this as a chance to sort of say, all right, I want to help. But do I need to take this on in a way that then feels like what you said? Because you use the words, I don't want to be Martha. So don't. That doesn't mean step away. Okay, good luck with that thing. No, that's not what I'm saying. But being Martha in this instance is falling into that trap of it being either or. And so maybe there's a way to try to find that middle path and just try it and do your best to be sort of like graceful with yourself, because it may not work out. You may just, you've had a lifetime of stepping into these moments. We all have, and we tend to go according to patterns, right? That's just how we do. So we try something new and then we tend to fall back into what we're comfortable with. So you may take more ownership of it than you really ultimately want to, but practice allowing yourself a little more freedom in it and see what happens. Don't cast yourself as Martha. Maybe enter into this by preparing meals like Mary. I don't know. See what happens. Give yourself a little more freedom to see, and more of that, and just saying, I'm going to do what I can, because when I do it that way, I'm able to do it with love, and not a sense of obligation and duty. That's where it gets to be, and that then becomes its own nourishment. You know, to do it with that sort of spirit, it's just wow. Because no one wants to feel like a burden. And if you get all, you know, if we all take on this and feel like, well, here's your freaking meals, all right, I'll be done with this. We don't say that. But sometimes that's how you can get received. No, I know we don't, but that's obvious. So yeah, so let's play with it and see what happens. Maybe in the weeks to come, you'll have, you know, just some stuff to share. Whether it's like, oh my gosh, it's worked out well. Oh, Dan, you were so wrong. Whatever.
Yeah.
Let's give ourselves a chance.
But you're
Try.
saying my attitude should be more merry.
I'm not saying shoulds, but I'm saying play with it. I'm saying allow yourself, check it, check yourself. Like just be aware of what it feels like when you say a yes. And then give yourself a permission to say some no's. Loving no's are just as valuable. They're just as loving. So it's not to say I'm rejecting you. No, I'm not going to do that, but I'm not going to take on what I was about to put on myself. And recognize that he wasn't putting it on you. Maybe you were. Maybe. It just sounds like when you say, I don't want to be Martha, sounds like that's what's at stake here.
Yeah.
So it's an opportunity.
Okay, thank you.
Sure. Let's go, unless there's any other comment, did you have something you want to say? Oh,
Well, I was thinking it would be good to suggest for him to call 211 or when he's at the hospital to ask if there's a social worker that can help with his adjustment when he gets home. I mean, there are lots of resources out there,
That's right.
but often we don't get them because we don't have.
yeah, that's true. That's true. So yeah, that might be another opportunity to say, I'm able to do this, but I also found some good stuff you may not know about this. And that can be helpful because whenever we equip each other, you know, we're also removing some burden from us. We equip them with some of that information. So it's just a way that some of this can work where you don't even take it all on quite the same. All right, let's get into Deborah and Barack. Okay, so this is from Judges chapter 4. And it's a little bit of a split. And the reason I split it is just because there's a couple verses in here that are just basically a bunch of names and stuff and places that don't quite add to the story. So rather than, you know, tripping up our tongues, we're just going to go, what was this? Judges chapter 4, verses 3 to 9. Could I have someone in the room be willing to read that? And then also 12 to 14. This is about Deborah.
There's a lot of trip up words in this.
There's still a good number of trip up words, but yeah, it's mostly narrative. Carol, you gonna jump into this?
Sure.
Okay.
Because he had 900 iron chariots and cruelly oppressed the Israelites for 20 years, he cried to the Lord for help. Deborah, a prophetess and wife of Lipidoth, was leading Israel at the time. He held court under the palm of Deborah between Ramah and Bethel in the hill country of Ephraim. And the Israelites came to her to have their disputes decided. She sent for Barack, son of Abinoam, from Kadesh in Naphtali, and said to him, the Lord, the God of Israel, commands you, go take with you 10,000 men of Naphtali and Zebulun and lead the way to Mount Tabor. I will lure Sisera, the commander of Jabin's army, with his chariots and his troops to the Kishon River and give him into your hands. Barack said to her, if you go with me, I will go. But if you don't go with me, I won't go. Very well, Deborah said, I will go with you. But because of the way you are going about this, the honor will not be yours. For the Lord will hand Sisera over to a woman. So Deborah went with Barack and Kadesh, where he summoned Zebulun and Naphtali. 10,000 men followed him, and Deborah also went with him.
And then just 12 to 14. Would someone like to pick up on that? Thank you. Well done with those names.
Yeah, really.
Anyone like just to read the last two verses here?
Oh, I'm sorry, did I miss two?
No, it's just 12 to 14. You didn't miss someone, did you?
Okay. When they told Sisera that Barack, son of Abinoam, had gone up to Mount Tabor, Sisera gathered together his 900 iron chariots and all the men with him from Harosheth Hagogoyim to the Gishon River. Then Deborah said to Barack, "Go, this is the day the Lord has given Sisera into your hands. Has not the Lord gone ahead of you?" So Barack went down Mount Tabor, followed by 10,000 men.
Okay, well done. All right. In summary, what's this about? What do you think that was just about? What's the real focus here?
But Deborah has a name we can pronounce and nobody else.
We've learned how to pronounce Barack. Okay, so Jay said, what we learned is that there are only 2 pronounceable names in this entire.
Well, I think Deborah wanted him to wait on God, and he said, "No, we're going."
I don't know if it's that he said, "No, we're going," but I think you're on it. Deborah, if you look at the way she talks, and she says this to Barack, it's always about, well, God will deliver this. God's going to do this. God said to me that this is how it's going to happen. And then Barack, when he get involved, he's like, well, okay, fine. But if you come with me, then I'll do it, because I know if you're with me that we'll win. So she puts her faith and her trust in God. Barack is focused on putting his hope in her, in another person. And she keeps telling him, listen, your focus is wrong here. So this is what you want, this is what you're saying, but God's going to deliver Sisera into the hands of a woman.
So is Barack using her like a good luck charm?
No, it's a great question. It's very common that military leaders like Barack would invite a prophet to go with them. And she's a lot of different roles, but in that role with him there, she was more of a prophet. They'd invite the prophet to go with, because they treat the prophets almost like an oracle and try to, it's better to have them there, because if they got any messages that they could respond. They felt like a prophet was representative. At that time they were of sort of more of a conduit to God. So prophets were often invited in these situations. So it wasn't him sort of trying to usurp her power. She was the one, sort of as the judge, she had more power than him in sort of their society. But he asked her to come with him because he wanted sort of the extra, protection that could be afforded to him.
I just got the impression that Barack said, "This is what I want to do. You come along, so it'll go okay."
Yeah, because he doesn't trust God to do it.
Right.
He's thinking it's about our efforts here.
Right.
And that's really, I think, what the story is putting, is sort of lifting up. Where our hopes are. We often have stated intentions, even in church, where we believe and trust in God. We've been talking about dreams, these places in our lives where we believe and trust in God. And yet in many instances, when push comes to shove, or when certain circumstances happen, we tend to give ourselves to people, or to putting our hopes in other people. It's not that it's wrong, it's just that it's not ultimate. Okay, I don't think it's wrong to hope in other people, but if we're given an opportunity to hope in God, and then we immediately do what Barack did, I think that's part of where he was tripping up. And he was missing his opportunity to sort of lean into this and say, all right, just trust it. Because that's what she was telling him. So, go ahead, Carol.
Well, and how many times do we come up with a plan? This is what I'm going to do. And oh, by the way, God, you come along so that what I want to do goes well.
And that's exactly how most of us do faith. That's exactly how most of us do faith. We bring God alongside as if it's like an extra card that we can stick into a machine to get what we want. Okay? And it's like, oh, shoot, this card doesn't work. Well, maybe my mom's Catholic card will work. Or, I've got this. Oh, hey, Pastor, can you come do this? Whatever. We use God in one way or another, like something so that, a means of getting something we want, like a vending machine. And that is just not what faith is about. And so in a sense, that's kind of how Barack treats God as well. You come with me, Deborah. You're sort of the, you represent God. You come with me and everything will go well. How many times do we do that? I almost don't even need to ask because it's just how a lot of us function. Our faith and the way we utilize God, or the way God is often utilized in the world, that we see so many examples of this. It's just, it's idolatry is what it is. It's a classic kind of definition of idolatry. Does anyone want to speak to that tendency we have, or in your own lives, the struggle to have the kind of faith that really remains kind of connected to God, as opposed to putting it on any person, whether it's someone you respect, like a minister or a pope, or your beloved grandparent that introduced you to the faith? There's so many ways we give ourselves to other people. Again, not that it's wrong, it just isn't always what's ultimate. It isn't always expansive to us. It can limit us. Have you ever found yourselves limited because of your tendency to take God along as your little pocket friend that you use when you want to, as opposed to actually listening to this one who is greater than you, not pocket-sized? It's a place of reflection, to be sure, and maybe something to chew on as we go through our weeks. How does God show up? How do we utilize God? How do we welcome God? Do we have a vending machine type of faith? Often our prayers can be reflective of that vending machine of faith. What do you think about Deborah? When you read that story, what were some qualities of her that stood out to you, if any? She was one who saw God. She lifted God's role for sure. What else came up? Did anything else sort of stand out about her to you?
She was willing to go with Barack, and that surprised me.
Yeah, it's true. She didn't balk at that request. This story is all about her sitting under that tree, Deborah's palm tree or whatever. Kind of like I thought of Lucy from Peanuts with her, the doctor is in. And she's there all the time, judging and just answering questions. And all of a sudden he asks her to go out in this big significant battle. And she's like, okay, but you're just focusing on me. It's like she just sort of is able to just move where she feels led by God to go. What else? Anything else stand out about her? Ken?
The thing I keep thinking about is the introduction to the story about the 900 chariots that had oppressed them for 20 years.
Right.
And she did not seem to be intimidated by what seemed like an impossible situation.
Exactly. And that is one of the main characteristics of her that I feel all of us, seek to welcome into ourselves. The type of faith that allows you to trust so much where your fear doesn't get the better of you. I'm not talking about outcomes. I'm not saying, trust in God and you'll defeat 900 chariots. No. But what you will defeat is your fear of those chariots, that you can then step into the moment that God calls you to, and then let God do the work. And trust that I'm here for a reason. And maybe it's to say hi to the guy on the bench, or maybe it's to go defeat 900 chariots, or something in between. But just trusting that when we go, that's the outcome. Our going is the outcome. And we can't control outcomes. We can't control what happens. But we only can control, are we guided by the faith or are we guided by the fear? She was clearly guided by her faith, and it enabled her to simply respond in her life, what was needed. She's balancing a ton of different roles here. She could have easily been a Martha in that place, because she's the judge, she's a mom, she's a prophet, she's a leader, she's doing all these different things. And yet she seems to have this sense of just balance. And it seems that it doesn't really talk much about it, but it just sort of, there's a flow that happens with her. And I think it's because, where does she put the onus of what is asked of her and where her decisions are coming from? She puts them more on God. And again, trusting so that she's free to go, not trusting that, okay, well, God, you're going to take care of every single thing. That may or may not be true, but it may not happen the way we want it to. When we say God will take care of everything, sometimes what we mean by that, God will take care of this that I've lined out here. Again, we're pulling out the card. It's like, yeah, God's going to take care of it the way I want. That's the difference. So freeing ourselves to then step into these places so that fear doesn't decide it for us, that itself is the outcome. And many of us in our lives, we go most of our lives waiting for that opportunity or resisting that opportunity. And maybe now will be a chance. Maybe there'll be a chance that comes up today. Who knows? Any other questions or comments about Deborah? I can't see any hands going up on the screen. All right. Well, friends, thank you as always for coming and having these conversations about these wonderful characters that we have. We'll continue next week, live and by Zoom, as we have been. Their readings will be posted. I apologize for the sake that for the fact that sometimes it takes a few days to get these things up. It's multiple layers of editing and recording, but they'll get there with the notes eventually. So thank you one and all for your attendance here and your questions and your consideration. And until we meet again, any questions?
Thank you, Dan. You do such a wonderful